Okay, so what we will do here is we will get more of a background understanding regarding the Old Testament. So with this, you get kind of like the mechanics behind it. So you are getting the all the information that is going on in the background. I don't know if any of you are familiar with computers, computer programming, and things like that. Um, when many years ago, I had done a little bit of that, and but you know that when you use your phone, like use your phone or your laptop, um, the what you see there, you can see the time and some images and all of that. What you see there is simply um, the user interface. That's what the user sees. But in the background, there's a lot of things going on that we don't see and we don't even know. Okay. But somebody who's a computer programmer that is doing their work right now, when they see that, they know everything that is going on in the background. Now, those things in the background, since we don't see it, since I don't see it, can I say, oh, that is useless, I don't need that, let's get rid of that, or let's ignore that because it is not necessary, I don't need it? But see, for me to properly use the user interface, okay, all of that has to be there in the background. Since that is there, the background information is there, that is why the phone or the laptop works properly. In the same way, the Old Testament, there's a lot of things in the background, the history and the mechanics that are behind it, that are important for our clear understanding of the Old Testament. And so we need to know those things. So, as I said earlier, if you have questions, make sure you write down those questions. And you can also put the questions in the chat box. And every maybe 15 minutes or so, we can take a few minutes to for questions and answers. Okay? All right. So first, we are looking at a general introduction to the Old Testament. Okay? More broad and general factors regarding the Old Testament. First, it's the major divisions of the Hebrew Old Testament. The Jewish people, they call the Bible the Tanakh. Okay, Tanakh is short term or short for TNK, Torah, Nabim, and Ketuvim. Okay, Torah, Nabim, and Ketuvim. For them, the Torah was the law. The Torah is the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, Torah. Then the rest is Navim, it's the prophets. Now, when we talk about prophets, this word prophets is much broader, and it goes on to Kings and Chronicles. All of these will come under prophets. And then finally, there is the Ketuvim. Ketuvim is the writings. See, for the Jewish people, the Torah was the most important factor, the most important part of the Old Testament. Or you can say it was the most foundational aspect of the Old Testament. And not only does the Torah, it contains, of course, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Not only does it give the beginnings of the heavens and the earth, but it also gives the beginnings of their faith, the beginnings of their nationhood as well. Okay, and also the history of their forefathers. Now, for us, when we talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or all of these people, for us, they're very important to us. But for Jewish people, there is more of a deeper and heartfelt aspect to that, much deeper than what we would value. Okay, we also value Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they value them at a different level or at a higher or deeper level because they are the people, they're the ones who are their forefathers. So they value that very highly. And so that is the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, where God not only established the heavens and the earth, but He's establishing the nation, He's establishing their worship, okay? And he also establishes them among the peoples of the nation, right there where he wants them. All of these things are part of God's plan for them, the Torah. The Navim, of course, goes much beyond that into their full history. Okay. Now, the prophets that we understand to be the former prophets or the latter prophets or things like, see, the prophets that we understand, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Hosea, and all of these things, prophets, they also saw them as prophets, but in a broader sense, they saw their prophecy as part of their history. Okay, or you can say they saw the history as part of the prophecy, all of it together. And then, of course, finally, the Ketuvim. Ketuvim was the writings, and the writings, um, they did not consider the writings as the same level as the Torah and the Navim. Okay, they didn't consider it at the same value, and it was more of the writings were more of like their literature, like today, what we would consider to be good, solid Christian literature, and to them it was something like that, the Ketuvim. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Palestinian geography and important places in the ancient Near East. Okay, that area, that whole area that we see there on the map is called the ancient Near East. Okay, and some people call it the Far East, and different names have been there, have been given to them. But and today, more recently, scholars have begun calling it ancient West Asia. Okay, ancient West Asia. Now, for this course, for the purpose of this course, we're using the older term, ancient Near East. Okay, so in the ancient Near East, that entire area, but now you have to understand the whole known world was right there. So Israel was situated in the center of the known world of that time. Okay, they were also the crossroads where much of the world traveled for trade and for other reasons as well. Okay, so this the location where Israel was, it was the crossroads. Crossroads of what? Well, here you have, let's say, for example, Israel was right there in the center. Okay, then right there on the southwestern corner, it would be west for you here, this side. Okay, southwestern corner, you have Egypt. Okay, of course, Africa is there, and then further below that, other African nations, Ethiopia and other nations are below them. Okay, but Egypt primarily. And then on the eastern side, southeastern side, you have Mesopotamia. Then you have Assyria and Babylon. And then north of them would be Tyre, Sidon, and Syria. And of course, there are many other nations as well. I'm just naming a few of them. But, and of course, all of Europe right above that further. Okay, and of course, if you go begin talking about Rome and Greece and all of that, just further north. Okay, so what am I trying to say? These were all very important cities and nations of that time that surrounded Israel, surrounded the people of God. So God established them, God set them right there in the middle of the known world. Very strategically, God placed them there. Now, why did God place them like that? Well, God had his purpose. Okay, God had his purpose. What was his purpose? Well, we know that in Genesis, God gives the covenant to Abraham. God calls Abraham and he said, look, I will make you into a great nation. And then he said to him, through you, all of the nations will be blessed. Okay, so there was an expectation that through the descendants of Abraham, the entire world, okay, which is all of the nations of the earth, the entire world of that time, what was known world of that time would be impacted by God's people. You see, when Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth," well, obviously, we know today, we understand that one of the factors is that you and I, being here in this world, we should have a positive, preserving, and energizing effect on the whole world. And of course, the kind of effect that we would bring salvation to the world, we would bring peace in the world, we would bring so many things that the world needs today through us. In the same way, God wanted Israel to impact the world of that time. Therefore, he placed them right in the center, right in the crossroads. Now, why do I use the term crossroads? The term crossroads is important because if somebody wanted to travel from Egypt to Babylon, the shortest and the wisest way to go would be through Israel. If they wanted to travel from Mesopotamia to Tyre, Sidon, Syria, or any of these nations, they would travel through these places. Now, of course, in the ancient times, during the time of Jesus, or any of these times, this would be the case. The people would have to travel through Israel. What does that mean? Well, of course, that means that Israel would have a chance to impact the world without even leaving where they are. You see, they could be a witness to the rest of the world that there is a God in Israel, that the God who created the heavens and the earth is alive and well right here in Israel, and that he is different from all other gods. And of course, during that time, gods were everywhere, everywhere. And they had shrines everywhere. And especially when people traveled, wherever they were traveling, there would be shrines. And so people would go there at the shrines and they would worship. They would light, they would light candles, or they would put incense. They would light a fire and do different things there to worship that God. So when they came to Israel, they would notice something different about Israel is that such shrines would not be there within Israel. That is why numerous times the prophet spoke to them and said to them to get rid of those, all of the shrines that were there and the foreign gods that were there, because Israel was to be a witness to the rest of the world that the God of Israel, the God who created the heavens and the earth, does not live in temples built by human hands and is not represented by images that human hands have built. See, these are all very important things. And that God was active in the lives of the people. See, wasn't this the case? From Abraham onwards and even before, wasn't this the case? God was actively and personally involved in their lives, and we'll talk about that later. And this was very important. So I'm just giving you a little bit of a kind of an idea of how they were to be an impact for the rest of the world. Okay, good. So, one of the things that I would like for you to do is to take a map right now, not right now, but later on. Take a map. Maybe you can use a map from your Bible, or you can Google it and find a good map and try to locate some of these places and other important localities on the map, and take a paper and a white paper and draw that map as best as you can. Even if you are not an artist, it's okay. You can try to draw that so that you can get a fair idea of the location of Israel amongst the nations, and right in the middle, somewhat in the center of the known world, but definitely in the crossroads of the known world of that time. Okay, next we'll talk about the formation of the books of the Bible. The entire process, we'll look at the entire process from event to text. What is the event? The event, obviously, is what happened, the situation that took place. It could be a conversation between people. It could be someone traveling. It could be someone worshiping. It could be two people fighting or arguing. It could be an army fighting. Any of these things. It could be the event, what really happened during that time. So after the event took place, the story of what happened or the record of what happened was passed on from one person to the next, from one generation to the next. This is called oral transmission. In other words, that story, that event, what happened there was transmitted from one generation to the next orally. They tell the stories one generation after the other. Let me give you an example. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? Where does that information come from? Where did the writer get that information? Well, one of the traditional way that we have always understood, the traditional understanding has been that Moses is the author of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Moses is the author of the entire Pentateuch. That has been the traditional understanding. And so when you were to ask the question, how did Moses get the information of how the heavens and the earth was formed and all that how did he get that information? Well, then we would say, well, he got that information because God told him. Well, can God do that? Definitely he can, right? I really believe that God can speak to people, and I believe that God can pass on information to people. Now, the other option is that the writer would have received this from other people through oral transmission and from written documents. Okay, so did Moses write it? Well, I feel that Moses would have written the earliest draft of a lot of these things. He might have been one of the earliest writers, the one who recorded much of these events. Up to that time, things were passed on orally from one generation to the next. So now we go back to Genesis 1 1. What happened? Well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How did that information get transmitted from one? Was there any human beings there at that time? Obviously not, because humans were only created after the earth and everything, all the vegetation, everything was made ready. Then God created Adam and Eve. Well, you know that in the book of Genesis, after the after the fall, after Adam and Eve sinned, we see that God comes down and he's walking in the garden. And he calls Adam and he says, Adam, where are you? So it was like God's usual practice in the cool of the evening to walk down and to go and have a walk with Adam and Eve. See, their relationship was very close. They had a very close and intimate relationship. It was the father and children relationship with Adam and Eve. And so they would walk together. And so one day God comes to walk and they're nowhere to be seen. But then you go back to the time when they walked together. Let me ask you, what did they talk about? What was their conversation? Okay. Now, today, if two people are walking, there might be talks of the election, there might be talks of the weather, there might be talks of Christmas and what you might be doing during this holiday season that is coming up. All kinds of. Oh, of course, the biggest discussion today would be Corona, and which is a worldwide phenomenon that's happening, and all the different factors we would talk about. But when God and Adam and Eve walked together, what did they talk about? None of these things were there. Okay. There was no sports. There was no politics. There was no, nothing was there. What did they talk about? Well, of course, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. But I would imagine as they were talking, as they were walking, it would get closer to the evening and they're walking. And of course, they would begin to see the moon. They begin to see the other stars. And the darker it gets, The stars get brighter. And I would just imagine in my mind Adam and Eve asking God, God, what is that? What is those lights? And some of those lights are bigger and some are smaller. And some of those lights, they seem to be flashing. What is that? And God would tell them, well, those are stars. And they would say, wow, how did it get there? And God says, I put them there. Wow, how did you do that? How did this, how did that happen? And I would imagine that God would have told them the story in the beginning. And of course, he would say it in his first person. He would say, in the beginning, I created the heavens and the earth, right? And then with my words I spoke, and with my words I did this. And I would imagine God speaking to them and telling them the story of what happened. Okay. And then later on, when Adam and Eve had children, they would pass on this story to their children. They would tell them, oh, this is what God told us, because this is what he did. This is how he created the heavens, the earth, and the sun, and the moon, and the stars, and the rivers, and the everything, the trees, and the vegetation, and the animals, all of these things. God created all of that with just his word. Just his voice was spoken. So they would pass it on from one generation to the next. Okay. And then you can imagine, finally, the stories would have come all the way to Moses. All right. And he would hear from the people that were there with him, and he would record these things. Okay, so the event takes place, then there's an oral transmission, and there are written stages. You notice I put plural there, written stages, and what was originally written maybe copied by others, and maybe things were added or corrections were made. Okay, and then finally there's a compilation and editing. Okay, there's a compiling and editing being done, and that would be toward the end, which was probably done during the exile or during the post-exilic time period. The compiling could have been done. Okay, but I really believe that a lot of writing, Moses could have done that while he was there in the wilderness, and of course whatever he wrote could have been further developed during the time of the kings. All right, so the formation of the books, the entire process from event to text. So you have the event, oral transmission, written stages, and then finally compiling and editing, possibly during the time of Solomon, possibly during the time of the exile, and further on. Okay, these are all different aspects that were important. All right, we have gone more than the 15 minutes I told you. So let's take a moment for questions, and I will stop the screen share so we can take a moment for any questions and doubts that you may have. All right, no one has put anything in the chat box yet, but you can also unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can put the question into the chat box. Either way. If there is anything that is unclear, if you need me to clarify something, I could do that. If you need me to repeat something, I could do that also. We only have a short amount of time, so we do need to cover a lot of things. But still, I want to give you an opportunity to ask. Okay. If there is no one, then we'll continue and continue the lecture with the PowerPoints. All right. Formation of the canon of the Old Testament. All right. When we say that, what is the canon? Well, the word itself, canon, would mean a rod or a measure. Okay. So today we might have a scale, or we might have like a tape measure we could pull out and to measure things. But years ago, some of you who are older might remember, people would take a stick, and they would measure the stick with their, it would be a hand breadth. They would measure the stick and break it off at that point, and they would use the stick to measure off distances, and they would say, okay, this many hand breadths, like that. That would be the measuring. So the word canon was like a measuring stick, was a rule, like a ruler. It could also be like a ruler you would take, and you write, you draw a line to make sure that the line is straight. All of those were similar concepts of the actual word canon. So when you talk about the canon of the Old Testament, the idea is this: which of the books were compiled as part of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, or what we call the Old Testament? Now, for a Jewish person, you don't want to tell them the Old Testament. They don't like that word. For them, it's the Bible, it's the Tanakh. Okay, which of the books were accepted, and within the books, which of the stories were accepted and put in? I mean, obviously, not everything from the time of from the time of creation to now is written there. Obviously, only select things have been given there. So, how did all of that happen? Well, I've given a few things here. First, there is the acceptance of the history. In other words, the people of that time. Now, when I say people of that time, now that's also quite a broad statement. Which time? Well, let's suppose we can begin with Moses. Okay, Moses and the people of his time. All right, what did they consider to be significant? Who did they consider to be significant? See, that second point: significant individuals. Who did they consider to be significant? Okay, the stories of those people, the experiences of those people were accepted into their history, into the canon. So for them, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were highly significant. Okay, and so their stories are given there and mentioned there in much detail. And look at Joseph. Look at Joseph. I mean, you have so many chapters. You go to book of into the book of if you go to Genesis, and you'll see so many chapters given to Joseph. Obviously, they considered Joseph as a very important person. Okay, otherwise they would not include so much about Joseph, and it's there. Okay, so there's an acceptance of the history, or I can also use the word selected history. And then individuals. Who are the individuals that were significant for them? Okay, not just any individuals, but the individuals that were significant for them. All right, then there is a wide acceptance and usage. So during the history of the Israelites, during the time, okay, which of the stories were most important? Which of the stories were accepted by most of the people, and the more prominent people? This was very important. Okay, and who were the prominent people of that time? Obviously, during the time of the kings, during the time of the monarchy, the kings, the prophets, and the priests. They were very prominent. But along with that, there was a group of people called sages. These were people that were the wise people of that time, the elders of that time. Okay, these people were all valued highly, and what they accepted as part of the history also was accepted by the rest of the people. Okay, another, you see a word: consistency. Okay, those aspects that were consistent throughout the history, aspects of God, the history of God, the history of God and his people, God and the relationship with his people, that were important to them. Then those things that were very consistent were kept. Those were not consistent were not kept. Okay, for example, today, and I really don't have much time for a lot of examples, but even today, you look at Christianity overall, and you just search on YouTube, you'll find all kinds of teachings and all kinds of ideas. Now, do all of these ideas get accepted? Obviously not, right? Some of these ideas are considered to be on the fringes, on the external side, and we don't really pay much attention to that. And some people are busy criticizing that. I hope you don't do that. Okay. Don't spend your time, effort, and energy criticizing others. If they're doing something you don't like, leave it. Okay. You spend your time focusing your time, energy, and your resources on things that God has called you to do. Okay. Don't waste your time. And then finally, authoritative messages. Okay. People that were significant of that time, people that were authoritative of that time, the messages that they gave were accepted and held as authoritative. These are all aspects of the, excuse me, these were all aspects of the canon of the Old Testament being formed. So the forming of the canon was not a one time event, but the formation of the canon was a long process. Okay, it was a gradual process. It wasn't just one time everybody got together or a group of people got together and they said, okay, we need a Bible. Come on, let's put together a Bible. All right, what do you say? What do you have? Any information you have? It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. It was a long process that took place. Now, in this, there was something else that is very significant. You see, we have to understand that the Bible is a record of God and his people and their relationship with each other. You need to see that. The Bible is not necessarily a history book, it has history. The Bible is necessarily not a poetry book, it has poetry. The Bible necessarily is not a book of proverbs, but it has proverbs. Okay, it's not a book of wise sayings, it has wise sayings. It's not just an apocalyptic book, although apocalyptic things are there, but rather the main factor is that the Bible is a record of God and his people and their relationship with each other. Okay, so that history of God and his people dealing with each other, that is what was carried down through the generations, and that was what finally was put down into writing. All right. Next, we're looking at the pre exilic period. Pre exilic period, the historical, socio-economic, and religious background of different periods of the Old Testament. So first we're looking at the pre-exilic period. So the pre-exilic period is the period before the exile. So we're going to look at some historical aspects and their sociological and economic aspects, the religious backgrounds. Okay, now when you see that, there's a lot of things involved, but I'm only going to give a little tidbits of that. We won't have enough time to share much detail. First, we'll look at the patriarchal times. Okay, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and such, these are the patriarchal times. So during the patriarchal times, they lived in the land of Canaan, all right? And there was no Israel of that time. There was no land of Israel at that time. There was no Jerusalem. There was no nation of Israel at that time. The patriarchs, they lived as sojourners, they lived as foreigners in a foreign land. Okay, so the Canaanite, all the different Canaanite, so the entire territory was called Canaanite, and the different nations were there. And the Canaanite nations, they were all there, and each of them had their own religion. Okay, now all of these Canaanite people, they may have been related to each other many generations back, tribal groups that developed. Okay, now what was their political situation? Well, they lived in somewhat of a relationship with each other, and each of the little nations, they had agreements with each other, they connected with each other. Now when I use the term nation, please do not think of it as nations today. Now we're having the elections going on in India right now in Kerala, but uh, but don't think of a nation as today's nation. Okay, during those times, each nation might have been a very large tribal group. It might have been certain ethnic groups. These are all nations that we understand to be nations. All right. So don't think of today's terminology as a nation. So even very far back, when you talk about rulers and kings, they were kings of probably a very large tribal group. That's probably it. It wasn't a king or a prime minister as like today. All right. Next, we'll look at the patriarchal family, their structure, the role, and the status of the members. Obviously, the patriarchal family was very male oriented, male dominated type of family. And their mode of life was an agrarian life. In other words, agriculture was their primary role. Okay. They were farmers, they were shepherds, and even the patriarchs could have also been called as nomads, traveling from one place to the next. Why did they travel from one place to the next? Obviously, they were looking for food for the cattle, because the number of cattle had expanded, and so they could not stay in one place. The cattle would finish up all the grass and all the food would be finished up, so they would keep traveling and moving toward new places to find new pasture. This was a constant thing that they did. So so they were partly agrarian, but also they had cattle and they would move on from one place to the next. Now, divine revelation and worship, this is another very significant aspect. Okay. Divine revelation during the time of the patriarchs was quite direct. In other words, God didn't really go through any mediators. God spoke directly to Abraham, he spoke directly to Isaac or Jacob or others that were there. He spoke directly to them. There was no intermediary, there was no priest and nothing else. It was just direct relationship with these people. Okay. And worship, oh, they built their own altars and they worship God. Okay. It didn't take priests or a priestly group or priestly tribe or Levitical tribe or anything like, of course they didn't exist at that time. None of that was required. None of those was required for their worship. Okay. Each individual, they could build their own altar and maybe make sacrifices and worship God. All right. All right. The next stage is bondage, liberation, and wilderness wandering. So the first stage we talked about was the patriarchal times. Second stage is the bondage, liberation, and wilderness wandering. So right after the patriarchal times, we know that the people were put in bondage and they were slaves to Egypt. Okay. And the slavery lasted about 400 years. Now, why were they made slaves? Well, most probably it was a political and economic move by the Egyptians, because because they were afraid that these people who were foreigners, and of course, the Bible says, a Pharaoh, the king, rose that didn't know Joseph. They didn't know who these people really were, didn't have any relationship with them. When that time came, they began to oppress the people of God. Because one of the reasons could be because they were afraid that if these people get too large and get too powerful, they could revolt. They could revolt and take over the land. And they were afraid of that. And of course, the second reason could be that they found it to be financially advantageous because, obviously free labor, and this was important to them as well. And Egypt did a lot of their construction projects using slaves as well. Second, God identifying with the oppressed. God identifying with the oppressed. Even during that time, the gods of the nations, okay, they were more closer to the upper caste, the more affluent, the more influential people. They were more closer to them. As a matter of fact, the kings of various nations, they would call themselves the son of their gods. And at that level, that is one of the reasons why many of the kings demanded that the people worship them. I'm not talking about the kings of Israel. I'm talking about kings of other nations. Okay. They demanded that the people should worship them. One of the reasons, it wasn't simply because, oh, okay, I want them to worship. Well, one of the reasons was because of their concept, because of their worldview. And their worldview was that the kings were descended directly from the gods, and therefore they also have divinity as part of them. And so they demanded the people should worship the kings. All right, now, then we have Moses, the life, call, leadership, and success and failures of Moses. All right, we know the life of Moses. Um, Born into a Hebrew slave family, and the parents wanted to keep him, but they couldn't. So they had to get rid of him. But God had a huge plan for this young boy, and his life became exemplary. His life became amazing. And so God kind of tailors his life to a place where he would be able to grow up at the king's palace and even getting the highest and the best education that anybody in Egypt and anybody possibly in the known world of that time could get. And obviously, Egypt was one of the top nations of that time. And if you are the son of the king of the top nation of that time, obviously that means that you would have the best training in every way possible that the nation could provide. And so Moses was well trained and developed and educated, and all of that was there for his life. See, some people, they oppose the idea that Moses could have written anything down. Now, I don't claim that Moses would have written all of the Pentateuch, but I say that I believe that he had a significant part in the writing process of the Old Testament, of the Pentateuch. Okay, one of the reasons I say that is because Moses definitely could have done the research and the writing. Okay, it's not just good enough just to do the writing, but he also should have the capability to do the research. He would have had that. Obviously, being raised as the grandson of the ruler of the most powerful nation of that time, sure, he would have had the best education and training that was available. Okay, then you come to the mountain of Sinai. All right, God is making covenant with the people after they were delivered from slavery. God is making a covenant with them. And of course, right there, we know that Moses delivers them, and Moses was the one through whom God does the miracle of parting the Red Sea. But when you come to Sinai, what is happening in Sinai? The covenant was made. The covenant was renewed. Obviously, the covenant was made with Abraham. We know that. The covenant was renewed with Isaac. The covenant was renewed with Jacob. And each generation, God renewed the covenant. And now the people, they have come together as an entire group, as a nation. And now God is making a covenant, not just with one or two individuals. He is making a covenant with the entire nation. There is also the word election, you will see. By the way, these are all from the notes that were given to you as well. Election, God is choosing. Election is choosing, right? Now, the election is going on right now in Kerala. Actually, in Pathanamthitta district, today was the election. Okay, so the election is actually, what is the election? You are electing a particular person, you are choosing. So I made my choice for whom I think should be the ward member here. Okay, so each person is choosing. God made a choice. God elected Israel as his very own people who would impact the rest of the world. Okay, and then there was a law giving. God gave the Torah to the people. That was the law. For what? Why did he do that? He gave it so that the people can live as God's people. In the covenant, God tells them, I'm making a covenant with you. You will be my people, and I will be your God. And as a covenant people of God, this is how you are to live. That is the stipulations behind, or the reasoning behind the law. See, the law was given not so that God could be a policeman. The law was given not so that God could be after people with a big stick. No, that wasn't the purpose of the law. That wasn't the focus of the law. But the focus of the law was this: God is telling the people, you are a special people. You are separated just for me. And the term separated, the word that was used was holy. You are holy to me. Okay? So this meant that they were holy to him. This was the case. And as the holy people of God, they were to be separated just for God, and they were not to be involved in anything that would not be pleasing to God. Okay, so he is the lawgiver of the covenant. And then commandments and ordinance for a new community. What is this new community? The new community is the people of God. See, who were they before? They were a bunch of slaves. And you know the verse in the Bible that says that we were not a people. At once you were not a people, and now you have been made a people. Who were they before? A bunch of slaves. So God took a bunch of slaves and made them into a people, a new community. He gave them a special place, and God said, you will be my people, you will be my nation, you will be my children, and I will be your God. All right. Then there were challenges to the life and faith of Israel in the wilderness. So as they were going through the wilderness, oh, the challenges was amazing. Obviously, trying to live and to survive. But of course, faith was the biggest challenge because God told them, I will take care of you, I will provide all that you need. But why did they have so much trouble? They had so much trouble because of a lack of faith. God wanted them to trust him that he will take care of all of their needs. But they would look around, they see the surroundings, and they say, the resources are not here. You ever do that? I do that sometimes. I've done that recently. I look around and I say, oh God, what are you doing, God? The resources are just not there. How am I going to make it? How am I going to survive? God is saying, relax, relax. I'm in charge. You'll allow me to be in charge. Faith was a great factor and a struggle for the people of Israel. And today, same issue is there. Faith is a big issue for us. It's a very difficult thing for us as well. Okay, good. So before we go on to the next item, um, because the next item is quite broad, let's take some questions. And if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question, or you can put the question in the chat box. We have one question there. Moj is asking the question: did God ask them to build altars, or did they get the idea from their neighboring communities? Okay, good question. Good question. So where did the idea of altars come from? Where did the idea of sacrifices come from? Can someone tell me? Can you remember what is the earliest? And maybe you can turn on your video just for this question answer session so we could see each other, please. What?
Not Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac.
Okay, that is quite early. Any earlier instances of sacrifice that you can remember?
God allowed Adam
Okay, God.
after the sin.
Abel sacrifice.
All right. Abel, was Abel sacrifice? Was that the first sacrifice? Was there any
No,
sacrifice before that?
after the sin of Adam,
Yeah.
yeah, God did a sacrifice for them.
Okay. So after Adam and Eve sinned, they realized that they were naked. And so they covered themselves with leaves, which obviously will not last. And so God made a provision for them. And he took an animal and killed the animal and took its hide and made clothing for them. Okay. That would be the first sacrifice. That may have been from where the concept of the sacrifice had taken place or have begun. All right. Good. Any other questions? Any comments? Any questions? Doubts? Maybe there might be something you might want to clarify something further, something you did not understand. Okay. If not, we'll continue. All right. So next we go to occupation of the land, the settlement, and the governing of the people. Under this, the ways of possessing the land. There is four, basically three, right? Not four, three. There are many other ideas also, by the way. There are many other theories that scholars have presented. All right. The first is conquest. Conquest is pretty much how the Bible tells us. Conquest, the idea of conquest is the Israelites, they cross the Jordan River, they go into the land, and they conquer the land. Okay, destroying the nations, warring with the nations, and the exact storyline as it is in the Bible, that would be the conquest. Next would be immigration. Okay, immigration meant, you know how Abraham had gone and lived among the people there. Okay, so immigration was the idea that the people simply came from different places and they settled there among the people and they became one among the people and they became large and they became prominent to a point where the Canaanites were kind of pushed out or pushed aside. Okay, they became less important, less prominent because the Israelites became very prominent. That is the idea of immigrant. There's another idea of peasant revolt. And see, during the ancient times, during the time that the Israelites were in the wilderness, okay, the people of Canaan, uh, and as you know, most nations of that time, the upper caste, the people who were the wealthiest, the people who were the powerful ones, they ruled and they had all of everything, you know. And the people that were the working class, the poor, the peasants, and they were always oppressed by the others. And the idea is that the peasants finally revolted against their rulers. And it was during this time that the Israelites came in and were trying to take over the land. And so the peasants, they joined forces with the Israelites coming in, and they pretty much helped the Israelites to take over the land. All right. So this is like three different theories of how the people had possessed the land. All right. A lot of there are some scholars who do not like and they do not accept this conquest idea. First, they consider it to be unethical. Next, they consider that these people cannot do it because they're just a bunch of slaves and coming through the wilderness for 40 years. How are they going to fight these people, these nations, and their armies? How are they going to fight them? Not possible. So they come up with different types of theories. theories of immigration, and theories of peasant revolt, and there are others as well. Okay, next, structure of Israelite society. Israelite society was structured uh, as a huge family. They were structured with families, clans, and tribes. Okay, one family. What is one family? Well, obviously, for them, a family is not a nuclear family as we know it today. Today, we have a lot of nuclear family, uh, father, mother, and children, one child or two child or 1.5 child or whatever it is. That is the nuclear family. But then during those times, rather than the nuclear family, they had a more broader uh, combined family. The joint family system was there. And so when you have a larger group like that, you end up with clans. Okay, several of these large family groupings together would be a clan, and then many clans together would form the tribe. Okay, so the land was distributed among the tribes of Israel, and they shared the resources because the people who lived near the water, near the rivers, they had resources the others didn't have. The people who lived in the mountains, and they had resources these people didn't have. So they shared their resources and they were connected with each other in that way. Their mode of life, the economic aspect, the legal aspect, the religious aspect was there. Well, the economic aspect is part of what I just mentioned to you. Okay. They shared the resources. That was part of their economy, selling and buying among different people who lived in different places. But of course, during that time, they did not have money like today, and rather it would be the bartering system. You give me 1 kilo of this and I'll give you a kilo of such and such, or a half kilo of this, or like that. There was a bartering system. And of course we know that gold and silver coins or different types of coins was also, but that was according to weight and value as well. Now the legal system during that time was mostly, up to that time, was mostly the tribal system. Okay, and then of course that developed further into the monarchy where the kings were ruling. And the religious system, well, you remember I told you in the early stages what happened is that the people dealt directly with God. There was not a problem, and they heard from God. They built altars for themselves, and they sacrificed and they worshiped Yahweh by themselves. Okay, but that began to change. The religious aspect, their faith aspect began to change, and it became more compartmentalized, and it became more specialized. And so you had the Levites who became they were the ones who were part of the worship system, and the children of Aaron, the sons of Aaron, would be the ones who would be the priests and the high priest. Okay, and who were the leaders of the society? You had judges, prophets, and priests. Okay, now when you use the term judges, it's not judges like today. Today you have judges who sit there with a gavel trying to help make a decision between two parties that oppose themselves or have a disagreement. But judges of that time were basically like leaders who God appointed, whom God raised up to save the people from their calamity, to save the people from destruction. Okay? Then there were prophets who spoke for God. God spoke through the prophets. And then, of course, the priests were the ones who stood between God and the people, and they played a very significant role in that way. Okay, so the occupation of the land, the settlement, and the governing. All right, then we get into the divided monarchy. The divided monarchy. Well, what is the monarchy? Monarchy is the rule of the kings. Okay, so we began with the kings. The first king, obviously, was um, Saul. Was the first king, and God removed him because of his disobedience. His heart went away from God, and God removed him, and God appointed David as the king. And of course, see, Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, was could possibly be considered a second king, and some people would dispute that, and but that's fine. All right. So David was the king that God appointed at that time. But then we know that David and Solomon, but during the time of Solomon, um, Israel enjoyed a great revival, enjoyed monetary, political, and in every way they enjoyed kind of productivity. Okay, they were, some people call that the golden era of Israel, the golden era of the nation. In every way, they were a highly developed nation of that time, possibly one of the most highly developed nations of that time as well. All right. Now, the role of some of the kings, the prophets and priests in Israel and Judah. Well, what happened? Well, you see, Solomon, after he passed away, his son, his son Rehoboam came into power. When his son Rehoboam came into power, you know the story. The people came and said to Rehoboam and said, "Look, your father was a very hard man, and we want to know, how will you treat us? How will you behave with us?" And of course, like any young person would do, he not he listened to his friends. Now he got the advice of his father's contemporaries, and they told him, "Look, answer favorably to the people, be kind to the people." But then he listened to his friends, and his friends said, "No, no, no, don't give in to that. Tell them that you're going to be more powerful than your father." All right. And he did that. He told them, "Look, my little finger will be will be stronger than my father's waist." Well, that became a problem. And the people said, "Look, we don't want you then." They literally walked away. And it was during that time that the 10 northern tribes literally separated, and only Judah remained with Rehoboam and with the descendants of David. And there was a man by the name of Jeroboam in the north who took over, and he became the king in the north of the 10 northern tribes. Okay. Now, in the divided monarchy, worship was a big issue, because where did the people worship? Well, obviously, the people worshiped in the temple in Jerusalem. But all of a sudden, now they are two different nations, same religion, same worship, same God. And this became a problem. This became a conflict. It became a conflict of interest for these people to come south and worship there among them. It became a problem. It became a conflict of interest for the people to come and worship there in Jerusalem. Okay. So that became a problem. And so obviously, Jeroboam ended up building another temple there in the north so that the people would not travel there to Jerusalem. Because if the people travel to Jerusalem, the people, their hearts may be drawn toward Judah, and the kings, they may lose their power, they may lose their authority. So they were afraid of that. So there was kind of a political decision to build a temple right there as well in the north. Okay. Then, of course, you have the fall of the kingdoms. The fall of the kingdoms is where the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom finally went into exile. Why did they go into exile? They went into exile because literally they walked away from God. You have the northern tribes, the northern kingdom, that were really walked away from God because they just simply went their own way. And they did not follow a particular dynasty either. They went from one dynasty to the next. They would have a dynasty for a short time, and so there was a lot more instability in the northern tribes, and so that heavy instability also worked into their faith and worked into their ethics as well. And so they began to take advantage of the poor. They began to take advantage of each other. And they were literally oppressing those who were poor, oppressing those who were less capable in many different ways. And this became a problem for them. And so the northern kingdom became very corrupt. But then, of course, the southern kingdom of Judah, they also followed suit, but not maybe not as bad as the northern kingdom, but still they were in a similar situation as well. So God literally drove them out of their land by bringing in the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And of course, the the Assyrians came and took away the northern kingdom first, and then it was later on that the Babylonians came and took away the southern kingdom of Judah as well. So we were talking about the divided monarchy, meaning the two kingdoms that were separated. And then we went all the way to the fall of the kingdoms and how they were taken into exile. So now we'll talk about the exilic period. See, some of the factors for the exile was that the northern tribes, they were taken away by the Assyrians, and the southern tribe of Judah, they were taken away by Babylon. Now, some of you, you might have heard the term the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Have you heard that? The 10 lost tribes of Israel. And that only Judah was there in the south, and the 10 lost tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes were in the north. Well, what actually happened was, you see, Judah, the southern kingdom, they were taken away into exile by Babylon, and Babylon kept all of them in one location, so they stayed together. But when the northern kingdom was taken away, they were taken away by Assyria, and Assyria, they did not keep them together. Their method of taking over nations was this: they would take the people and they would scatter them throughout the different nations all over the place. Okay? So they were spread throughout different nations and they were not able to stay together. So that after some time, these people from the northern kingdom, they lost their identity, they lost their faith, they lost their history, they lost everything, and they just became one with the nations that they were part of. And the southern kingdom of Judah, they stayed together in Babylon. Okay, they stayed together in Babylon, and since they stayed together, they were able to do justice to keeping the language a little bit. They were not able to do that fully because the second and third or fourth generation that were there born in Babylon, they began to speak the local language, which was Aramaic, and Hebrew was pretty much lost, but many of them still knew some Hebrew, but they were not fluent in Hebrew. Hebrew was not their, their daily conversational language, and that became a difficulty for them. Okay, so these are some of the important factors that they were facing. Okay, and even worship and the religion. Well, they worked hard to stay together and to worship Yahweh and to keep their faith, and they taught the people, they taught the children, and so a lot of the things that you see in the first century among the Jewish people that were different from the Old Testament Jews or the Old Testament Hebrews, what was so different, much of that developed during the exile. Why? It developed because the people realized that if they did not handle this very carefully, their next generation would lose their faith. Their next generation would have no connection with the God of Israel. They would have no connection with Yahweh. They would have no connection with anything that was Israelite. Their history would be lost, and literally their nation would be lost. Okay, so they were very aware of that, and so therefore they not only, they not only met together, they taught their children, and they began to explain to the children from the Torah in their language that the children could understand. And that was the new language, which is very similar to Hebrew, but it was Aramaic. Okay. Now, what about this 10 lost tribes idea? Well, um, it wasn't only the tribe of Judah that was taken away by the Babylon. You see, when the northern kingdom was attacked by Assyria, and when the Assyrian armies came in and they began to attack the northern tribes, the people from different tribal groups in the north, they ran and escaped and came to the south. Many of them from all different tribes, they ran to Judah to escape this. And the ones that came, they lived there temporarily in the south. And so they escaped the exile for a while. But what happened, of course, was the southern kingdom was also exiled. But when the southern kingdom was exiled, they had people from all different tribes, from all the 10 tribes as well, from the north, was there in the south. So all the 12 tribes were there, put together right there in the south, among the in Judah. Okay. All right. So these are some of the specific factors for the exile. The social religious situation of the Israelites in exile is what I just shared with you just a minute ago. Sociologically, they were in the midst of two cultures, two societies. One was the Israelite society, Israelite culture that they had. And now they're coming into a new culture, new area, new land. The Babylonians, they were there, they were in power. Okay. So you're talking about 3 or 4 generations that were born right there in a foreign land. So some of you may have relatives in working in other nations, maybe UK or US or Australia or all other countries in Europe or all different places. And maybe they've been there for 10 or 20 or 30 years or a couple of generations. Okay, either they would never come back to Kerala or to India, or when they come, they would have a very difficult time connecting because they have already become like those people. They may have lost the language, which is one of the first things that they lose. The language and the culture would be lost. And hopefully they would keep their faith. All right. And so this was a similar situation that the Israelites faced in the exile. During this time, the role of the prophets, okay, the role of the prophets was very important because the prophets encouraged the people to stay focused on Yahweh. You see, what happened is when the people were taken into exile, they were very troubled because, see, they understood themselves to be the very people of God. They, they had the covenant with God. They said, wait a minute, I thought we were the people of God. God promised that we made a covenant with God, or God made the covenant with us, and He promised that He would be our God and we will be His people forever. And He also promised that there would always be one of David's descendants ready to stay on the throne. So they expected that the throne of David would continue forever. And so they expected nothing would happen to their nation. But look at this. All right. And so the prophets and those who taught them, the priests, and they were the ones who explained to them, look, the reason this has happened is not that some problem with God or God's plans, not at all. But it was you and your forefathers who were corrupt, who misused the temple, who misused their privileges, who misused and abused the poor people of the land, and all of the political and social factors that were taking place there. And the corruption that was there, it was tremendous. And so God literally just had enough, and He had to bring correction to His people. And so this is how He did it. So the northern tribes, the northern, the nation in the north, they were gone forever. They were lost. But then the southern kingdom, and of course, representing all 12 tribes, they were able to come back. All right. Okay, let's move on. The post exilic period. What happened during the time afterwards? All right. I think there are some questions. So let me go to the questions first before continuing, because the post exilic would have a lot of detail. And so let me stop the screen share for a minute so we can go to some of these questions. All right. First question from Dr. Raju K. George. Was Aramaic a simplified form of Hebrew, or is it a pagan language? Okay. Actually, Aramaic is a totally separate language, but well connected with Hebrew. Okay. Those who study Hebrew, you just had to study one extra semester of Aramaic to be able to know how to read and to translate. A lot of the words, same the same the same writing, the same text, and much of the grammar is very similar, but some differences are there in grammar and in vocabulary and usage as well. So when we studied Hebrew, um, we had the Hebrew studies and the Hebrew exegesis and all of what we did. But then for Aramaic, we only had one semester of Aramaic, and then of course we had enough to be able to do the translation and exegesis after that. Okay, so it was a different language, but they were well connected. Okay, the next question from Thomas Matthew. What is the relation between Aramaic and Syriac? All right, I am not very familiar with Syriac, except that that was a language from Syria. Is that right? And but I do not know the connection between Aramaic and Syriac. So I'm sorry, I don't have that information. I don't want to give you any misinformation. I don't want to make up an answer because I do not know the answer to that question. Next, Moj has asked this question. If the 10 tribes were scattered by the Assyrians, they adopted the Assyrian culture and intermarried. How are the 10 tribes still able to recognize their respective tribes today? Okay, see, first of all, the 10 tribes were scattered by the Assyrians to the different nations, not just in Assyria, they were scattered to all different nations. So whichever nation they were scattered to, they took on the identity of that nation and they just kind of blended in with their culture, their language, and their religion and all of that. Okay. And the second part of your question, all right, so they didn't necessarily adopt the Assyrian culture. So the second part of this, your question, how are the 10 tribes still able to recognize their respective tribes today? All right, the answer to that question is that when the northern kingdom was attacked by the Assyrians and they held a siege there and they were taking over the northern kingdom, at that time, many people from the different tribes in the northern kingdom, they ran to the south and they escaped the horrible things that the Assyrians were doing. They were ruthless, by the way. The Assyrians were very ruthless, and they escaped the horrible things that they were doing by running away to the southern kingdom. So, from all of the 10 tribes that were there in the north, there were people represented there in the southern kingdom as well. So that's how they're still able to understand and to know their tribes as well. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Anything else?
I will like to ask a continuation of my question. Aramaic was the mother tongue of which country or which nation?
Babylon.
Babylon. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Babylon obviously was taken over later on by the Persians. Okay. So I'm sorry, not Babylon. The It was the Persian language. It was the Persian language. Okay. So Babylon was taken over by the Persians, and it was their language. Yeah. But it was so close to Hebrew. If you were to look at it, it would be difficult to tell the difference. Yeah. Nizzy
Yeah,
Matthew. Yes, tell me.
I have one more. The historical records available, in the rest of the world, during that time, do they give any evidence or indication of the rulers or the culture of Israel?
Very little, not much. Very little.
For example, in Esther, it is mentioned about India, and Solomon also had some trade, with India,
Yes.
Indian kings. But these other nations' historical records do not give any light to these, Israel's kings or
Yeah,
culture.
not very much. Very little.
Right.
And the mentioning is very little. And some of the uh, ancient Canaanite literature, they have some mention of the Habiru, a group of people called that they call the Habiru, and they think that it may have been their terminology for the Hebrew people. Okay, during that time, they were not called Israelites; they were the Hebrews. And even today, if you talk to some of the Jewish people and ask them, about their faith or who they are, they would say, "I'm Hebrew," and that was still how they would refer to themselves. Now, to clarify your question a little bit more, I'll just tell you a little experience that I had several years back when I was traveling. I was traveling through the Heathrow Airport, and getting back on the flight, I remember there was a our hand luggage was being checked, and of course, in my hand luggage on the top I had my Bible. And so the person who was checking my luggage, he opened my luggage and he first saw my Bible there. He took it in his hand and he had a very kind of a disgusted look on his face. And he looked at me and says, "Oh, what is this?" And I said to him, I said, "Oh, that's my Bible." He said, "You believe this?" I said, "Yeah, I do." And then, of course, he went on to say that, "Oh, I read this book. That book is telling me that telling." Or he said that book is proving that all of this is fake and this is not true and this is just all made up, cooked up stories. And he said, and I said to him, "Oh, really?" He said this. Yes, this is what the book says. He said, "Yeah." And and he goes on to say, those people that you have, like Abraham, there's no history that nobody mentions Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, or none of your people, none of the other nations mention them. See? And so I said to him, "Really?" And of course he was very happy because he thought that I was convinced of what he was telling me, and he was getting more excited as he was explaining about that book that he read, and uh, and he was telling me this. And then finally, after he became more happy and excited about this, he he I said to him, I said, look, let me explain something to you. You see, you are here in the UK and I'm from India. When the history of India is written, they will not be writing about me. And when the history of UK is written, they will not write about me either. Because and also when the history of UK is written, they will not write about you. When the history of India is written, India will not write about you either. Because you are not that important, and I am not that important for India to be in India's history book, and I am not any important to be in the history book of the British people either. See, for Israel, Abraham was very important to the Israelites. So their history book, their literature, their writings, they contain stories about him and the history behind that. But other nations, they could care less. They don't have any value regarding this, and so they don't include it. So anyway, that's the explanation I gave to him, and I quickly went away. So this is the issue that the other nations don't mention, because very often the other nations were defeated by the Israelites, and so the relationship might not have been that good, and they did not mention. And and another aspect of these other nations, their historical writings, their religious writings, were very different from Israel's writings. If you look at the Israel's records, they give the negatives of their kings, the negatives of their priests, the negatives of their prophets, the negatives of their entire nation. Look at that. We have it right there in the Bible, and the positives. Okay? So when you see the negatives and the positives, you begin to think that, wait, maybe this literature is genuine. Maybe this writing is very genuine. But these other nations, they only show the positives. And their kings are presented as not only as gods, their kings are presented as perfect, nothing wrong. They do nothing wrong at all. They're almost non human. They're like gods, you see? And their history also is so perfect. Their nation is perfect. Nothing happens to them. They don't lose any battles. They don't lose anything. You see? And we know that's not the reality with any nation. Every nation they have losses. Every nation they have problems. Every king, every priest, there are problems, and that's part of life. And so when you look at these other nations, that's the kind of literature they have. Okay, just to give you a little bit a brief, not much time to get into a lot of detail there. Someone else, there is another one. Explain the question pattern for these portions. Okay, we'll do that at the end. I don't know, of course, I won't know what the exact questions will be there. I can share with you some of the questions from the last few years, and then I think in the last 1 or 2 years, I have some of the old question papers that you can look at, and I don't know what will come up now. How did the exile affect the religious and economic life of the people? Okay, good question. See, the religious and the economic life. The religious life, of course, as I mentioned, um, they became their leaders, their priests, and they were very focused and wanted to make sure that the next generation would really be focused on Yahweh and would not commit the sins and the mistakes of their forefathers. So they were very focused on this. And one of the things that we'll notice is that it is possible that it was during the exile and after the exile that the Israelites were known as the people of the book. You see, the writings of the Israelites, their history, their religious writings, and all of these were probably finalized and codified and edited and put together during the exile and after the exile, during the exilic and the post-exilic times. That was so religiously, I mean, regarding their religion, that was one of the primary things that happened during that time. And their faith, they wanted to make sure that it was more firm, and they did not want this generation to go away from God. Okay. And then the other part of that is the economic life. See, the economic life was very difficult because after 70 years, they're coming back to their land. And, like during the lockdown, our church property, we couldn't go there much. And I would go there, I'm walking distance from our church. But very quickly the grass grew and it became looking bad. And we like to keep it nice and neat and the grass cut and everything, but then everything started growing and looking bad in just weeks of time, in just 1 or 2 months. So imagine the land of Israel left for 70 years. Okay. Now, who were the people that were left there? These were the poorest of the poor. And these are the people who lived hand to mouth. Okay. And so all of the people that were prominent, the educated people, the wealthy people, those who were able to plan and organize, all of them were taken away into Babylon and to Assyria. And only these people were left. And so what happened to the land? The land became desolate and literally just kind of became a mess. And of course, when the Babylonians and the Assyrians, when they left, they destroyed everything, okay, and made it almost unlivable and unusable. So when they came back, it was a whole new process of rebuilding. So the economic life was really affected, and it probably took them a long time to get back to a normal economic status. That was very difficult for the people. Okay, and there's one more question. How did the exile affect the religious and economic? Okay, I think that is the same question. Okay, so we have that much. Okay, anyone else? Other questions, doubts regarding the exile and what they faced during that time, or any of the earlier things that we mentioned? Okay, so then let's continue. So we talked about the factors of the exile, the social and religious situation of the Israelites in exile, and then we talked about the role of the prophets and of the priests as well. And they became, they became more focused on the next generation. They began to produce their literature and refine their literature. And there was a lot of writing during that time in Aramaic, because they would take the Hebrew um, Torah, and they would explain it to the next generation in Aramaic. Obviously, in the temple they would read only Hebrew. They'd read it in Hebrew and they would explain it to them in Aramaic. And that explanation was often written down. Okay, that explanation was written down, and the later generations, they began to call it the oral Torah. Okay, they called it the oral Torah, and that was what was written in Aramaic, and that was kind of like the commentary on the Torah. Okay, so the Torah was only in Hebrew, and but then that became the Aramaic, became the commentary, the kind of the explanation of the Torah in that language. All right, good. Now we'll look at the post-exilic period, and we're almost at the end right here with the post-exilic period, and we'll talk about the last one or two examinations. I think they were very similar, the last two. Well, two that I have with me, and I don't know about the last year. But here are some things after the exile. All right. First, factors for the return to the promised land. All right. What about the return? You see, they did not all want to return to the promised land. And I gave you the example of maybe friends or family members that you have that have gone to other nations and they have lived there for maybe 1 or 2 generations. They don't want to come back. Okay, they're not interested in coming back, especially the second or third generation. They would never come back. And even the first generation may not want to come back. Or the first generation may have the desire to come back, but the second generation would not come. And so they often want to stay with their children and grandchildren. So they also will remain there. In the same way, okay, they were settled there in this new place, Babylon. And Babylon was a very prominent nation of that time, very highly developed in many ways, and it was a prosperous nation. And so they lived there and they became part of the land as well. Okay, of course, they attempted to keep the language, they kept their religion, they kept their identity, but still the subsequent generations, they struggled because they were more connected with the new land rather than Israel. Now, going back was very difficult because what are you going back to? You're going back to a land that was pretty much destroyed. Okay, it would become like a forest. I told you during the lockdown, 1 or 2 months. Our church property was a mess. Some of you may have all experienced some of that as well. But soon, as soon as we could, we got people to come and cut the grass and clean up everything as quickly as we could because we don't keep it like that. But imagine a land that's left for 70 years. And now coming back to that land, it was very difficult. And many didn't want to come back. And so the prophets and the priests and the leaders, they did their best to encourage the people to come back to the land. And they were trying to encourage them and saying, look, this is our identity. This is our people. This is our own land. And where we are right now, this is a foreign land. We'll always be foreigners. And that was their explanation to the next generation. So, did they all come back? No, they didn't all come back. But they came, many that did come, they came in several waves. Second, reorganizing and establishing life in the land. Which land? Their land, the land of Israel, the land of Palestine. Okay, and that was very difficult because they had to rebuild. They had to rebuild the temple. They had to rebuild the palace. They had to rebuild the wall, and they went through a lot of struggles and difficulties. And the stories with Ezra and Nehemiah and the things that they faced. It was difficult. It wasn't easy at all. But there were people, not only leaders, but people who were willing to risk their life for the rebuilding. See, although there were many who could care less, although many who didn't even want to come back, but still there were a few people that were willing to stand up and say, no, we will rebuild. We will stick with what God has planned for us. And they did that. Okay. They also understood that it was God's plan. Okay. Many of them, they understood it was God's plan. How else would a foreign king give permission to do this? Nobody usually does this. So go back and build in the new land, and you go ahead and build your temple and build the wall and all that. And these kings, they funded that. The money came from there. Okay, so God opened their hearts and God opened the way for this to happen. Now, let me also clarify one thing. Why did Cyrus allow that to happen? Why did these kings allow Israel to rebuild? Well, the primary reason would have been, of course, the primary reason is that God put that in their hearts. But then I would say the secondary reason is that it would be economically advantageous for them to have these people to go to their land and to rebuild that land, because they would rebuild that land, but would not remain independent. They would remain under the control of Babylon. Well, by that time it was Persia. Okay, the Medes and the Persians. So by that time they would be under the Persian control, and so because of that, okay, they knew that if they were able to build their land, that entire huge area of Palestine would be rebuilt, and then what would happen? Economy would be restarted, and they would be paying taxes. Okay, these people would be paying taxes, and the king and their government would benefit from Israel rebuilding. So that was one of the aspects as well. So the primary reason, I would say, yes, it was the work of God. Okay, God was the one who opened that door for them. The secondary reason that the kings allowed this to happen would be that it would be an economic reason. They would get taxes from them, and that was economically very advantageous to them. Okay, all right, reorganizing and establishing life in the land, rebuilding the temple and the wall, and of course the worship. All right, now worship was different now than before. How was it different? Well, they did not reinstate the sacrifices, because once they left and they were in Babylon, they were not able to do the sacrifices anymore, and those sacrifices were not reinstated in the same way. And different places, they began to establish places of prayer, places of worship, and if we can use that term, and thus the concept of the synagogue was developed. Okay, because the people, they wanted to make sure that the generations would really stay focused on Yahweh and not get lost among all the other peoples that were there. So they were very focused. And so these things were done as part of their worship, as part of their religious identity. Okay, so small communities of worship were established all over the place. Okay, and the role of the prophets became very important, because the prophets spoke for God and spoke in a way that they were able to convince the people to come back, convince the people to rebuild, to convince the people to give financially and to for the rebuilding of the temple and all of the things that were being done. Okay, and of course we know very well about the role of the reformers, Ezra and Nehemiah. They were like they were like the special people that took it upon themselves and risked their life for the rebuilding. Okay, all right. One of the things that I'll mention here: review of history by the Chronicles. Okay. I had skipped this idea, but it is there in the syllabus, so let me explain this. You might have noticed that when you look at the book of, um, when you look at the Kings and Chronicles, you might have noticed a lot of similarity, right? Uh, Much of the same history is pretty much repeated. And in some areas, you will find word for word repetition. And you might have wondered why this is repeated like that, literally word for word, because that obviously shows one was copied from the other. So scholars have the understanding that the book of Kings, the first and second Kings, were probably written first, and were probably written at the time that the people had gone into exile, to show the people why they went into exile. I explained to you earlier, the beginning of the exile, the people were literally in a shock. They were like, what is happening to us? Why did we lose our temple and uh, our nation, our worship, our everything was lost, our identity is lost, and what about the covenant? We thought we had a covenant with God and God would be faithful to us forever, and what happened? But they forgot to realize, they did not remember that the covenant came with certain stipulations. Okay, and their forefathers had, generation after generation after generation, they broke the stipulations of the covenant. And it was already mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy that if you do such and such, God will scatter you through the nation. And it was mentioned there. And this is exactly what has happened. So the kings were probably written to explain to them why this happened. And so, therefore, when you read the book of Kings, you would see all the negative, gory detail of the kings and their lifestyle and what they did and all of the horrible things that they experienced. But when you look at the book of Chronicles, it looks like the Chronicles obviously is shorter, and it looks like some of the history of the kings is cleaned up a little bit. It's not as severe, not as bad. All the gory, bad stuff is not mentioned so much in detail in Chronicles. And so many scholars believe that the Chronicles could have been written for the people coming back to their land. So you have the book of Kings written to a people going into exile or people who had just gone into exile, and the book of Chronicles for the people that are getting ready to go back to the land, trying to explain to them, look, we are a people of great heritage and culture. We are a people of rich cultural heritage and religious and faith and all of, and they said, we cannot just ignore that. And we want to keep that up. And you coming back to the land would be very important because you become part of the history. See? So Chronicles became very important because they were reviewing their history and explaining to them by going back to the land and becoming part of the rebuilding process, you become part of the history of our nation, of God's people. And so this was very important to them. And so many more, okay, as by not only the Ezra, Nehemiah, and the prophets and the sages and the writers, many more people were able to come back. And then finally, the role of liberation, the Maccabees. All right. You see, Judas Maccabees, Judas Maccabees and the Maccabean, like a family were there who actually opposed the, you see, what happened is, after they returned there, the, uh, the Greeks came into power. Obviously, after Alexander the Great, okay, the Alexander the Great, how he took over, and and Israel was part of the Seleucids, and the Seleucids were one of the groups that split off. The Alexander the Great, he had died at a younger age, but then his five generals, they took over the land. They kind of split up, and the Seleucids were part. They were the ones who ruled Israel. But they really did not like the Israelites, and they looked down on the Israelites. They looked down on the Jewish religion and their faith, and there were a time where their faith and their practices were literally prohibited. Okay, at that point, okay, this the Maccabees, their family, the priests, they revolted and began a rebellion, and so it was, and of course they rebelled, and they, so there were numerous rebellions actually during that time, and this is very important because we noticed that the people did not uh, get the liberation that they really wanted because they were constantly under the rulership of other nations. So after the exile, they really never had peace there. They really were never ruling themselves. They were in their own land, but they were being ruled by a foreign nation. So that was their situation. It was very sad. But then, of course, during the, now, of course, Israel has their own land and still, but, and they're ruling themselves, but still there is so much dispute there, right? In the Middle East going on. All right, so this is the whole kind of a broad view of of the Old Testament, some of the background of the Old Testament, and I will end here with this explanation. And let's go to any other questions we have, and then after that we can look at some of the some of the question papers and the type of questions that were given before. All right. Okay, we have one question here. There were some Israelites left behind from Babylonian captivity. There were conflicts when they returned after their exile. Okay, I guess that's okay. Yeah, I suppose you have like two questions, two parts to your question. Okay, and second one would be Jeremiah encouraged for the exile life in Babylon. All right. So the first question you have there, yes, there were people that were left behind. And I mentioned to you earlier that these were the poorest of the poor. These are the people that lived hand to mouth. And this was part of their military tactic, because and they made sure that they took the most wealthy, the most educated, the prominent, powerful, the ruling class, all of those, the aristocratic people, they took them away because they knew that if they simply came and destroyed everything and took some people away, then these people would rebuild. Okay, they would rebuild the land, and they would stay independent. And the only way they could keep them from doing that was to take away all of the prominent people and leave only these people behind. Now, what about these poor people? Well, all people are valuable to God, by the way. All people are God's creation. They're all valuable to God. But when it comes to nation building, when it comes to the stability of the nation, many of these people, they could not think further than survival. They were very focused on survival. They had to take care of their children, their families, and that's all they could do. They couldn't think about, oh, what could we do to organize our nation, our country, or clean up this place, or build an army, or build a temple governing, they couldn't do any of that. And of course, another aspect of that was they intermarried and intermingled with the people of other nations as well, that were probably brought there by the Assyrians. Okay, as I told you, the Assyrians, their method was to take the people that they captured and scatter them everywhere. So when the Assyrians took other nations, okay, let me mute. Okay. When the Assyrians took other nations, took control of other nations, they would take those people and bring them here and try to settle them there. So that was their situation. And the second question was, Jeremiah encouraged the exile life in Babylon. Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yes. And Jeremiah told them to settle there and live at peace and be happy there. And some of the people were not they were not happy with that, because why would you do this? Because we are, this is a foreign nation and we're not supposed to be here. Why are you telling us this? But then Jeremiah was telling them, look, stay there, live there, because God has a plan to keep you there for some time. So why fight it? And that was the reason. God had spoken to Jeremiah that, look, Jeremiah, this is not a temporary thing. They're going to be there for some time. Will not be deliverance until some time, until the time I have set. So relax, settle there. Yeah. All right. So somebody has raised their hand. Who was that? Ramsey Taragan. Okay, Ramsey, would you please, if you have a question, would you unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask your question? And then I'll go to other printed questions here. Some others have given questions as a text.
I think we can go ahead.
Okay.
We can go ahead.
You can go on. All right. So the next question there is, what role did the prophets play during the exile period, the exilic period? Okay. See, the prophets during the exilic period, Jeremiah was one who prophesied during the exile as well. And the prophets were the ones who would speak for God during that time. See, God continued to speak to them, although they were in exile. And so their role was that, as well as keeping the people focused in faith. So the prophets and the priests and the scribes were there. They were putting together documents for the people to preserve their faith. Okay. One, to put it into codified written form. Second, their role was to give it in the language of the next generation. You had these young people, second and third and fourth generation, that were growing up, because they were there for 70 years and more, And so the younger people, they didn't know Hebrew, and so they were busy doing these types of things. All right, and then Father George John, how did exile affect the religious and economic life of the people? All right, I've mentioned that already. Okay, anyone else? Other comments? Any questions? Or do you need any further explanation regarding that question? Okay, then let me go to the, I'll stop the screen share right now. And, well, I had already stopped the screen share, right? Yes, yes, I think so, yes. And what I will do is, okay, I cannot minimize. Let's see, what can I do? Yeah, so let me share with you a couple of the previous question papers. I think both are very similar. And let me see if I can share the screen with you and you can see the older ones. This is from 2018. And you should be able to see this. And if you want, you can take a screenshot of this. But then, of course, this video will be available to you. This is from 2018. All right, answer any 5 questions. The first one was draw a map of ancient West Asia and mark 10 important places and explain the importance of the geography of Palestine. Second question, write an essay on the Exodus event and the role of Moses in it, right? What happened during the exile and the whole event behind that, and the plagues, and you can explain all of that. And what role did Moses play in that? Okay. All right. God was the deliverer, but Moses was also the deliverer. Before the eyes of the people, Moses was the deliverer. And God spoke through Moses, and the people heard through Moses. Third question, discuss the life and customs of the patriarchs. All right, we did that as well here. We mentioned that, and the life and customs of the patriarchs. They were partially agrarian, meaning they did agriculture, but mostly they were, and you can use the term pastoral in nature. That means they were like nomadic tribe, looking for pasture for their sheep and their cattle, their animals that they had. They're looking for food for them. So they were like nomadic tribes traveling from one place to the other, looking for food for their people, of course, for their people too, but for their animals. I explain any 4 theories of the settlement of the Israelites in Palestine. All right, you can stick with just the 3 theories that was mentioned. That should be sufficient. All right, theories of the settlement that was mentioned, and you can go ahead and look that up further for further reading. So now you have an idea of what those theories were, and you can explain that further. You can do more reading. You can Google it and find theories of settlement in Palestine by the Israelites. Number 5, explain the cause or the causes for the fall of Samaria. All right, that is the northern kingdom, Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom, and the causes, and we mentioned that as well. And then number 6, how did the prophets prepare the people of God to face the exile? That was what we were talking about just a minute ago. Number 7, write an essay concerning the role of Ezra and Nehemiah in restructuring the post-exilic community. Good. And then write short notes on any one of the following judges, the reasons for the emergence of the monarchy and the united monarchy and the fall of Jerusalem. Okay. All right. Let's see. There's another one, but I think the next one is almost the same. Let me see if I could take that as also 2018. Okay, this was a year before, but I think they're mostly pretty much the same. Let me just share that as well. and you can not much difference during those 2 years, but yeah. Number one is the same. Number two, write an essay on the Exodus event. Number three, discuss the life and customs of the patriarchs. Number four, sorry. Yeah. So, how did the prophets prepare? Everything else pretty much the same. Yeah. Those 2 years, they were the same, but I would not, I would not, uh, yeah, I would not assume that that would be the same all the time. And I think all that time, all that time, it was given as uh, a college. Yeah, it was a college examined, and I think now it is Senate examined. So you'll still see similar questions, but they may not all be the same. All right. Other questions? How did the exiles affect Judaism as a whole? All right. Judaism as did it impact that as a whole? Yes, of course. And as I said before, everything was centered only around the Jerusalem temple. Okay, only with the Jerusalem temple. But then now, what happens is not only that, you have the establishment of the different uh, synagogues and places of worship, and that was also there, and yeah. So Judaism, some of the changes that took place that you find differences in Judaism you find in the first century were the result of the intertestamental period, and you have some classes you'll be studying about that as well. Okay, good, good. All right, I think that's about it of the questions that were asked. Any other questions? And the time is already close to 9 o'clock. You've been patiently here for about 2.5 hours now. Yeah. Other questions? So today, not today, sometime tomorrow, I will. Maybe it might be about 2 days, because tomorrow we have a faculty meeting, and that may take the whole day. But let's see, Thursday or Friday, I'll work on just editing this and uploading it, and I will send to all of you the link. Okay, no other questions? Then I will pray for you before we close. All right. Okay, let me pray for you, please. Would you please turn on your videos? That way we can see each other. And I would like to just pray a prayer of blessing for all of you. Father, thank you for the grace that you give us. Thank you for the faith of the fathers. Thank you for the faith that you've given us. But most of all, Lord, I thank you for your faithfulness to us, generation after generation. Lord, you lead us in the most difficult times. You have been faithful to us, and you have been our strength. You have been our guide, and you have been everything to us. Lord, I bless each of these students, and I pray for your wisdom and your understanding as they study, as they prepare for their exams. I pray that you would give them clarity in thinking. They will be able to remember all of the things that they have read, the things they have written, the things that they have drawn, the things that they have listened to in these lectures, and that all of these concepts would come back in their minds, and that they would be able to formulate their ideas and formulate their words appropriately to be able to answer the questions. But most importantly, Lord, I pray that they would be able to use these concepts to interpret your word, and so that each one of them may be a powerful tool in the kingdom of God, that they would be they would be able to, they would be used by you, Lord, to impact others around them, Lord. Thank you, Father, for doing this. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, thank you. God bless you, and you have a wonderful evening. All right. Any further questions? You are welcome to ask those questions in the WhatsApp group, and we can still discuss. And of course, as I said, I will share this video with all of you later, hopefully in a couple of days. Thank you.